Welcome everybody to the White Noise podcast. On today's episode, say hello to Dr. Dioné.
Hi everyone, very nice to be here.
Dr. Dioné, do you mind giving a brief introduction to the show and tonight's episode, please?
Oh, my pleasure. So tonight I thought it would be, I was given the choice of topic, and I thought it would be a good idea to expand on something that I've mentioned in previous conversations, which is toxic femininity. And generally I've sort of touched on it and just given a couple of examples of what that looks like. And the reason for that is because our general focus has been on toxic masculinity. So I thought that it's very important to also articulate the ways in which women have power and the ways in which that manifests in different contexts. And what I haven't yet delved into in much depth is how it manifests in the workplace, and also what the perspective is from liberals in terms of what toxic femininity looks like, and they have a very different understanding. So I thought that that would be a very interesting topic for us to delve into, also because I think women are very much aware of its existence, but often don't really speak very honestly about it because of the pressure from feminists. So I thought that would be a good topic for us tonight.
Okay, well, I think that's a very good topic because all men are trash in general. That's the narrative that gets punted everywhere. And and this trash has taken itself out on many occasions. And I'm happy to hear the other side of femininity for once, because like you and I both discussed earlier, the mainstream narrative will let you believe that all men are toxic. So I think to set the ground level for this discussion is just a kind of brief historical overview of, let's call it femininity. Where did it start? And I think the first wave feminism was quite noble. It was basically in the 19th/20th century when the ladies have made enough sandwiches for their husbands and they were out drinking too much with their buddies. And you guys decided it's time to vote. And also to get some property, kick the man out on his ass because he's drinking all night. So basically, first wave, in the first wave, it was for feminism, it was all about voting and property rights and also gender equality. Then around in the 90s, 60s and 80s, we had second wave and it brought the debate a bit. And then it had topics like sexuality, family, in the workspace, reproductive rights, and also a bit of inequalities, and official legal inequalities was kind of what it was based on. It also started critiquing the patriarchal or male-dominated institutions and cultural practices throughout society.
And also just to mention there also the role of identity, so that women stop seeing their identity as being wrapped up with the family and their role as a wife and as a mother, that there was something beyond that.
So it became kind of empowered, individualistic almost.
Yes.
So you don't have to be a wife by default. Yes. You can actually have a bit of agency and become a career woman. And the be all end all is not to have a family anymore.
I think the character in The Hours, so what's her name? The woman who's in the 1950s, so she reads Virginia Woolf's novel, Mrs. Dalloway, and her character is essentially an exploration of that concept, that she wasn't satisfied by her role as a mother and as a wife, and it's not because she didn't love her husband and her child, it's because she was literally dying in that imposed structure on her life, and that she wanted to break free of that. And the only way she could do that without harming her husband and her child was to leave. I think that was an incredibly powerful representation of that idea, mainly because it showed also not just the positive aspects, but the negative aspects of what happened there. So that awakening and that empowerment comes at a cost. So for me, that was an incredibly powerful film because it was showing feminism, but it wasn't trying to mask the negative aspects of that reality. And it's not to judge any of the characters. It's just to say that there are consequences. No matter what you do, there are consequences. So yeah,
Yes.
so I think that's a good example of that.
And this is where it all kind of goes to shit. The third way, feminism, where intersectionality comes in. So the textbook definition basically describes the idea of women's experience, layers of oppression caused, for example, by gender, race, and class. And I looked at this and I'm like, this smells pretty much like it was cooked up in a critical theory dungeon or gulag. And it starts that whole rhetoric of the woman doesn't have agency, all women are oppressed. And effectively what it did is it pissed all over first and second wave by taking, I'm a man explaining this, by the way, by taking away agency. Yeah, I'm mansplaining this. By taking away agency from women. So for me, that is a hell of a step back from the first and second wave. There is a fourth wave, but we won't cover it because it's too ridiculous. Dioné, your take on this? Oh, I just want to add to this. Sorry. It adds the following as well. This was a kind of funny thing that I found. Feminist currents and theories such as, I already mentioned intersectionality, sex positivity, I don't know what that means, and vegetarian ecofeminism, transfeminism, and here's another red light, postmodern feminism. So
let me just step in there quickly. Look, the deal with critical theory is that it's not that it's completely wrong, because part of what it's recognizing is that to an extent you do have these different ways in which people have suffered, and that's true. I mean, people have suffered in different ways because people have been marginalized in different ways. And so, a white woman who is affluent doesn't struggle with feminist issues in the same way that a black woman, that comes from a history of slavery in the States would struggle with feminist issues. That's true. The part where it sort of unravels is where it tries to hone in on those identities to the point where there's no clarity around what it is they're trying to achieve. So what emancipation looks like. And in so doing, they also do a disservice to their own cause, because now instead of focusing on what it is they want to achieve, and that's my main criticism of a lot of the activist projects we've seen, is that because of the nature of their own ideology, it inevitably leads to internal conflict, because they can't actually align in certain ways that would amplify their power. And then also the extreme case of that, of course, is the postmodern case, where it's not just about having different identity groups that have a different interpretation of what's happening, but it actually reaching the point where they now say that there's no such thing as objective truth. There's no such thing as objective morality. There is literally just your interpretation of events. So now, as Jordan Peterson has pointed out, if you go down that road, then why don't you then reach a point where you actually hone in, not just on, a black woman who is in a particular class, but a particular individual in that class. So you can basically reduce that to so many different identity groups, to the point where the smallest identity is the individual. But how would you ever achieve anything or have any sort of shared reality so that you can actually agree upon a way in which society ought to be structured to enable it to flourish? So that's where the whole critical theory, postmodern take starts to unravel, and it becomes internally it's inconsistent. Because again, if there's no such thing as truth, there's no such thing as morality, then how do you think that you're in a position to tell people that what they're doing is wrong? Because there's no such thing as being wrong or being right. There's only your interpretation of it. And that's something that feminists in third wave feminism rarely want to confront.
Well, they first need to confront all those contradictions and and
Yes.
take a step back, I think. And that would actually be better for them in the long run. But like you mentioned, everyone is kind of tackling their own sub-issue within the movement, and it's a incoherent mess that just kind of sprawls along the floor. It's not consistent at all. And inherently, the moment you get wrapped up in postmodernism and critical theory, you always cannibalize yourself at the end of the day, and it becomes not only a virtue signaling Olympics. It also becomes a big cannibalistic fair where the one party cannibalizes the other because I'm more virtuous and righteous than thou art. And it becomes this weird thing where this is the ringleader and then she gets taken down because she wasn't woke enough, and it just never ends well.
And also, the reason that happens is also because it's a morality you don't have to work for. It's a morality that's based on my subjective view of the matter, in which
by
case,
lived experience.
I just have to say it's so, and then it is so. And so in that sense, people achieve a moral righteousness that they don't have to make any sacrifices for. They can just say that that's how they feel. And that's sort of the dream, because it means that they can sort of elevate themselves and be morally superior without having to go through any of the struggle of being a moral person. So in that sense, it makes people feel that their lives have meaning in a very quick, easy, convenient way. And I think that is a mark of our society now, is that it's about convenience. It's about what makes me comfortable. And in that sense, we've become more narcissistic than ever. It's astounding to me that the people who tend to represent this movement, dictate to us or condescend to us about, the people and doing away with oppression. But their approach to it is so narcissistic that I can't actually take it seriously.
In itself.
Yeah, exactly, and oppressive in itself. Yeah.
What I don't like about it, it throws facts and rationality out the window, and it gets overridden by feelings. And feelings is the measuring stick by which something is right or wrong, which is completely irrational. So if my feelings get hurt, you must be wrong by default, and that's absolute bullshit. It throws rationality and factuality and everything that we've known to actually, that's made us great as humans, is the fact that we could always rationalize everything, and we could build knowledge, and we could move forward, and we could take the best aspects from one culture and move forward with it. So
look, what I have to mention here though is that it's not that I take issue with this idea of questioning the notion of rationality and logic and science and all of those things, because part of my education in philosophy is very much preoccupied with that, is that we do question and we do interrogate what logic is. And if you've done logic, you'll understand also that it's not straightforward. It's not as black and white as people seem to think it is.
Yes.
And so there's nothing wrong with interrogating those notions. I think that that's healthy, but it's a very different thing to abandon those notions altogether. And then that tends to be the move when the logic or the science or the facts don't go how they anticipate. Their next move is to then call into question whether those things exist at all. And that's where I can't sort of go along with the narrative, because it's absurd to me to question whether there is such a thing as logic or there are facts. Yes, we can talk about definitions and we can argue about what those definitions are, but once we abandon the idea of a shared reality, I have no idea how you propose to change society, which is their dominant mandate is to change society in the way that they think it should be changed. First of all, they're not clear on how they think it should be changed, and they're not clear on what the end state looks like. And then furthermore, they have no clear understanding of how we move towards that. And so for me, that's the that's the part where I'm like, yeah, no, I can't go along with that.
There we go. So having said that and laid the groundwork of this conversation, kind of where it comes from and giving both sides, please let's jump into tonight's topic and
Cool.
Let's get to it.
Cool. So as you've clearly laid out for yourself, you are toxic masculinity, and I expect that you will mansplain to me at various points. I need you to know I'm comfortable with this because I'm secure in my own femininity to know that I can meet you. And that's a big part of the conversation tonight, is that I want to clarify and bring to the surface the ways in which women have power. And I don't think we talk about that enough. So I'm going to start by talking about toxic masculinity, because that's obviously the dominant topic these days. So I'll tell you why you are really terrible, because
Your
you're
woman-splain to me why I'm terrible and a piece of shit.
I will tell you. Don't worry. I will tell you. Okay.
I can't wait for it.
So hopefully after tonight, you will know how to be a better man. Or actually, you'll know how to be more like a woman, because that feels like that's what they're asking for.
Can I be brave?
So when people talk about toxic masculinity, what they're generally talking about are masculine traits that have for a very long time been put on a pedestal and have sort of been idolized as the way that a man ought to be. And they try and then show how those traits can become toxic. So I've got a list of traits, and then I'll try and explain how they can be perceived as toxic. And I think that, look, to an extent, I think that we will understand to some of what they mean by this. So it's not that I think all of it is bullshit, but obviously it's how you go about addressing it and how far do you go with that. So first of all, we've got strength. Strength is obviously traditionally perceived to be a very good masculine trait, that you need to be strong. Lack of emotion, so being stoic, that's also considered to be like a very important masculine trait. We can obviously also, we can understand why, because if you had to go to war, having a mental breakdown every time a comrade fell to the ground, it would kind of, get in the way of the whole, waging war thing. So you kind of needed to be in control of your emotions and sometimes suppress your emotions to be able to survive. So,
yes.
We can understand how that could become something that was a virtue for men. Self-sufficiency, so essentially not showing vulnerability or not showing that you're dependent on others. Dominance, so being able to show your power over others. So if you needed to basically gain control of a situation, in any sort of context like that, it would be useful if you could display dominance. And then sexual virility, so being quite promiscuous and being, very popular with the ladies. That's considered, and it's still considered, I mean, come on, like guys, if guys are, seeing a lot of girls, that's generally considered to be a pretty cool thing. Like other guys sort of look up to that and go, yeah, that's pretty awesome.
This is a good boot. That's usually what guys say. Or lekker boykie.
All right, but when those traits, so the idea is if those traits become distorted or they become exaggerated, then that can lead to undesirable consequences. So you can have men who are overly aggressive. So essentially they'll overreact to certain things and they'll suddenly just punch a guy because, the guy looked at them the wrong way, for example. Be sexually aggressive or controlling sexually, for example. That's another way of displaying dominance. This one is common. It's a common complaint amongst women when men don't show emotion. So for women, it's very hard when men don't show how they feel. And the reason it's hard for women is because we want to feel connected to the person that we're with. So it's very hard if we can't tell what they're going through. And it's also not the greatest in the sense that when the man suppresses their emotions, there inevitably comes a moment where something triggers that emotion and it comes out in a very like explosive way. Yes.
Sorry, I just want to take a step back with the question of emotions. So if I don't have emotions, I'll say, Dioné, get me a beer. If I have emotions, is it, hey, honey, can you please get me a beer? Is that showing emotions? I'm not sure. I don't have any. Sorry, that's me, toxic masculinity.
Being emotionally aware or emotionally vulnerable is like if you're more quiet than usual or whatever, and your girlfriend asks you, "What's wrong?" and you go, "Nothing," and she knows something's wrong, but you're like, "No, it's fine. No, it's fine. Like seriously, it's fine."
Yeah, the women do that a lot as well, just in our defense.
No, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. They're passive aggressive. So then days later, the car won't start and you will fucking lose your shit because the car won't start. But it has nothing to do with the car. It's because something happened at work and you're upset about it and you don't want to talk about it because you feel like it demeans your masculinity or something like that.
Yes. You're undermining my oppression. Yeah. I hate it when women do that.
And then another one is low empathy. So if you become quite self-sufficient and you don't easily connect with others emotionally, it also means that it prevents you from having empathy. Women traditionally are more empathetic, and men tend to not be as empathetic. But that can reach an extreme case where you struggle so much to empathize with your loved ones that they won't come to you if they're struggling with something, because they know that you can't support them because you can't empathize with them. So that can essentially mean that you become distanced from those you love. So that's one of those. And then chauvinism.
Sorry, Dioné. Just that one. If you do feel like you can't love them anymore, just go away for a weekend fishing, and then after that, hopefully, you'll love them all again, like to the fullest.
This is the thing, though. I don't actually think that that's bad advice because I think that. So, have you watched the documentary, "The Octopus Teacher"? My Octopus Teacher.
I won't say that because I've got a heavy Afrikaans accent, but I haven't yet, but I've heard it's quite good.
So you should watch it. In that documentary, it is about a man who's kind of lost his way. And the way that he comes back to his family is not by talking to death with his family. It's by going back to something that means something to him, that soothes him, that allows him to rejuvenate in a way that he otherwise couldn't. And that is him going back to the ocean. And that's how at the end he is able to become a good husband and father again. So I think that women tend to think that the solution to they think of emotional issues in terms of how they would deal with it, but they don't want to accept that how a man deals with their emotions is not the same. And so what they would need to be okay is not necessarily what a man would need to be okay. Yes. And part of being in a relationship is understanding that you can't impose on a man what works for you. Maybe that's not what works for them, and there's something wrong with that. Yeah. So anyway, so then we have chauvinism and sexism. I know you saw that one coming, but that's part of it.
It's my homies.
Yeah.
It seems like Amy's conflating that documentary with a bit of hentai here, but Amy.
He falls in love with the octopus. Okay.
I'm not sure. Sorry, Dioné, you know better. Go for it.
No, I just heard someone say that Candace Owens said some crap about that film is about bestiality. He doesn't have sex with the octopus. He connects with the octopus, as in he learns from the octopus, he befriends the octopus, he engages with it. It's with her, it's a she. It's beautiful. Like it's an absolutely stunning, like it just reveals how he at one point says that the feeling of feeling like you're part of nature rather than standing outside of it, there's nothing that compares to that. And that's what he experiences.
Yeah, so me as a toxic male will add to that. Just because we like something, we don't always want to sleep with it. I mean, you can you can have a meaningful bond with the birds that you throw out a few crumbs in the morning. You can have a bond with your dog.
Yes.
Doesn't you know? So that whole notion is such bullshit.
Yeah.
And some people are just screwed. So continue, please.
Yeah. Okay, so. Oh, geez, I could go on about toxic masculinity for days. Although the one thing that I have to say, though, is in this article when I was reading about toxic masculinity.
Just proceed, please.
Okay. When I was reading about toxic masculinity, the one component of that someone identified, you'll easily find this article if you just look up toxic masculinity, is not being a feminist ally. So the claim is that if you don't go along with the feminist narrative, then that is a form of toxic masculinity, which I find absolutely appalling. To suggest that if you don't go along with feminism, then that means you're displaying toxic masculinity, because the feminist agenda has become so complex and so distorted that I think it's terrible to suggest that you need to be part of the feminist movement to not be toxically masculine. So I think that's disgusting, just by the way. But then I want to get on to, so when I was doing my little bit of research on what liberals think toxic femininity means, so it's not that they haven't considered this idea, but their definition is not the definition I have. So according to their definition, toxic femininity is when women express stereotypically feminine traits such as passivity, empathy, sensuality, patience, tenderness, and receptivity. The part I don't agree with is when they say that it results in those individuals ignoring their mental or physical needs to sustain those around them. So basically, toxic femininity, according to liberals, is when women work towards the needs of others and neglect their own needs. So he gives examples. I think it's a male author who wrote this article. He gives examples. So this is, according to liberals, is what toxic femininity is. A woman won't let herself eat anything but a salad while on a date.
I hope she can have a dinner as well, at the very least.
Every sweater in a woman's closet is thinner and frailer than any in a man's possession. I'm not making this up. You can go and just Google this, okay? When a parent insists on piercing the ears of a moment-old girl baby to ensure she looks ornamented and sufficiently pretty. This is also great. Having a lengthy and complicated nightly facial care routine is essential. And this one, if buying a gift for a woman, they reach for something soft, sweet, and non-threatening. Okay, so basically what liberals are doing is, again, blaming the man. So saying that toxic femininity is when I behave in a way that conforms to what men think femininity is. And because of that, I'm neglecting my own needs. But that's the guy's fault, because they've now, presented me with this notion of what it means to be a woman, and me being such a subservient, lacking in agency, I can't go, you know what, screw that, that's a stupid notion, I'm just not going to do that. Just because I go along with it, it's still the man's fault. So I think that's such a distortion of what's going on.
I was just going to ask what your favorite salad is, and now you're telling me you're going to screw me. I'm like,
yes,
damn it.
Yes, I will. But no.
Are you a steak lady or a seafood lady?
It depends on the night, but I will have what I want, and I have never ordered a salad for my dinner. That's bullshit. No offense to people who do that, but I don't do that, and I've never felt pressure to do that. I think it's ridiculous, especially in this day and age, to suggest that toxic femininity is about this sort of thing, where you basically neglect your own needs because you try to go along with a notion of femininity that's been developed or that men have sort of come up with. I have no understanding of that idea, just because first, second, and third wave feminism, all the way through, at the very least, are trying to support this idea of female agency. I have no understanding of why it is that by the year 2020, you can't think to yourself, why am I doing this? If you can't actually go through that process, then I'm sorry, it's not a man's fault. If you can't reflect on your own behavior and think to yourself, this is not me, this is not who I am. See, ribs, exactly, I like that. Eat some damn ribs.
There we go.
Honestly.
Love that, Rand. So what you're basically saying is some people have you believe that it's all men's fault and women have no agency. And I've hanged out with a lot of ladies telling guys to fuck off if their behavior becomes irrational. Like they don't take shit from no one. And then you get your more introverted ladies, they'll be more reserved, but push them far enough, and those still ones become dangerous because they attack like hell. Once being pushed up.
Again, yes, and again the suggestion that if women are going along with an old-fashioned notion of femininity, it's the man's fault. Really, in 2020, it's still the man's fault that you don't have the balls to stand up to him and say, not even stand up to him. Honestly, I don't understand where these women get this idea from that a man wants them to do these things. If the man hasn't said that, if the man has in no way indicated that that's something that they want you to do, then I'm sorry, it's all on you if you conform to this old-fashioned notion of femininity. Like, I don't understand how that's now suddenly the guy's fault. And I've never had a man say to me, can you please engage in a lengthy nighttime routine of taking care of your skin? I really need that for this relationship to work. It's never happened to me.
Yeah, that's a funny one. It's like, listen here, you repulsive troll, go put on some cream on your skin. It's just like, I mean, really, like the most ladies that I know, pamper themselves quite well and they look after themselves. It's very seldomly, this party's getting started if you take your top off, Dioné. The doctors. No, I'm getting excited because it seems like you're picking up speed now. So
yes,
you're going to throw some wisdom bombs now.
Yeah.
There we go. Stretch a bit.
Yeah, I'm stretching. Just getting ready for this. Okay.
Fight or flight. Here we go. Protein boost from Amy LaRue. Yes, Amy. Always the protein. That's good.
So now I want to talk about what I think toxic femininity is, because that's not what I think toxic femininity is. So I got some really great examples from women in the workplace and even outside of it. And I think this more clearly demonstrates what toxic femininity is about. So it's the manager who verbally abuses teammates and then blames premenstrual syndrome. It's the lover who withholds sex until she gets her way about a vacation.
I hate it when she does that, by the way. But she's withheld sex for less, though, to be honest. Just putting it out.
So this is more around like, what does female power look like? Is the counselor who empathizes so deeply with the client that she tells her to file a false rape case. She's the kindest boss you have ever had, yet why is her name on the report you authored? You bonded over feminism, but she treats you like a pariah now that you've had a baby. So, according to this woman, and we'll get into the ways in which I disagree with her, but according to this article, she says that toxic femininity is when women use their gender to obtain certain privileges. So if we go back to the traditionally feminine traits, okay, empathy, compassion, nurturance, team playing, those are often the reasons why recent articles have come out saying that women would make better leaders because they're like this, whatever. But the flip side of that is that, yes, those can be good qualities, but those qualities, just like toxic masculinity, those qualities can be distorted. And that's when women use their feminine qualities to get what they want. And they can do that in lots of insidious ways because they're not as confrontational as men. So they will tend to be passive aggressive. That doesn't mean they're any less manipulative. They just won't do it in a way that's very obvious and very in your face. And I wanted to just throw this statistic in. So in a recent study, more than 70% of women reported feeling bullied by their female colleagues. And when it looked, males seem to bully more equally. So if men are bullying, it's sort of 50-50. So they'll bully men and women equally, whereas women tend to feel more bullied by other women. And I can also attest to that. In the workplace, I find that women are much harder to deal with than men. And it is because a lot of their behavior is very difficult to call out. That's the part that's really difficult about it. You can't really call it out because they do it in a very subtle, indirect, passive-aggressive way. And it can make your life utterly miserable. Like some of the examples that I've used to suggest that. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything about that.
Yeah, I think in general in the workplace, men tend to walk on eggshells when it comes to women at the workplace. I mean, the guys can make jokes about pretty much everything, but if a lady is close by, you kind of check around you, and you really have kind of, you're walking on eggshells, because unless you know she's one of the guys, which is always awesome, you get those ladies. Yeah. They have a great sense of humor. They've got a lot of gees, and they're just a complete joy to be around with. But there's always the fucking Karen in the workplace that's always there. She's looking to stir shit. And if you say the wrong thing on the wrong day, you'll get a letter from HR or from your manager saying like, you know, you shouldn't make these inappropriate jokes. And then it wasn't inappropriate at all. And then you're like, okay, well, who was it? And then he wouldn't say. And then, you know, that damn Karen is at it again. So, yeah. And there's also kind of men tend to get out with their feelings quicker. So if two men have a quarrel, they'll give each other shit on the spot and get it over with, and the air is cleared. In my experience as well at work, it tends to be a very pent up, passive aggressive, silent war between the women at work. And it's like, and there's always factionalism, like factions for days. Not that men don't do factions, but I find it more passive aggressive, weird, kind of with the ladies, because in the hallway, they'll be pretty nice with each other. And fucking the moment they turn their backs to each other, they're just spewing vitriol. Like, she's such a bitch. I hate her guts. Like, they're more wealthy than me. All that bullshit, you know, it's incredible.
Yeah, no, it's a cold war, absolutely. And the thing is that even though women will want to say that they're allies, in the sense that they want to be feminists, the moment that there's something to be gained from the situation, fuck that. Like, I will use whatever I have in my arsenal to get what I want. And that's been my experience. And I think that a lot of women have experienced this. So this sort of, camaraderie around shared causes, that's a nice idea. But at the end of the day, we do have power. And our power, most of the time, our power is our sexuality, and we do use it. And I think any woman who says that she hasn't used her sexuality ever for anything is lying. Because even in the office, like, you know when a guy has a crush on you or finds you attractive, and I'm not saying all women use this to their advantage, but it is a power that you have. And I think women need to be honest about the fact that this is a power they wield, and they can do it very viciously and indiscriminately, and they can be really brutal about it. And in this sense, I would say men are really weak, because men are are driven by sexual virility. In that sense, they are pretty weak, because women just seem to have this ability to, use
Careful,
their
you're
sexuality.
you're making a blanket statement there. So I'd say highly susceptible, for sure. Especially, I'd add to that, maybe this might be my theory. If they haven't been getting some good action,
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
the less action they have, the
Yeah.
more susceptible. The more action they get, the less susceptible.
Yeah, that's true.
My 5 cents. That's my 5 cents.
That's probably true as well. Yeah. No, I would agree with that.
And then what I always love is women in technical sales or selling like big ass hardware. Like they don't know a shit what they're talking about initially, but they sell like a lot because that very same point we just made. Like men love, especially in a men's world kind of place where there's a lady with big tits. Dude, I've seen this in my industry. It's incredible. And power to them. I'm not taking anything away from them because, like you mentioned, if you can make it work and you can make a profit out of it, you're not stripping and no problem with stripping, by the way, ladies, you do you. But you're using your assets, if I can put it like that, to win. And if a person or a company buys into your assets, them titties, instead of the actual product, you do you. It's a free market, so I don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll give credit to those ladies. So that's my 5 cents on that.
So I wanted to go through some examples because I found some really great examples about toxic femininity in the workplace. So this woman talks about how we tend to use our so-called weaknesses to our advantage when it suits us. So in 2017, a media company gave women the option to take the first day of their periods off. So what then started happening is that they would tell people, just tell him you have your period, and he won't be able to tolerate the embarrassment. So if you had a male manager, you know what, if you need a day off, just tell the guy, look, it's your period. And men tend to get embarrassed, so they'll just be like, yes, it's fine, just, it's fine, you do you. But because of that, because they started realizing that women were abusing it, they then withdrew that privilege. And so again, that's a way in which you're taking something that is legitimate, because there are women who genuinely on first day of their periods, it's hell. And they really would need to actually, it's like being sick. They would need to stay at home. But because women take advantage of that weakness, it can actually just create a very toxic environment for everyone. So those other women, those poor women who need it, now won't have it. And then obviously the one I just talked about is women will deploy their sexuality. So ranging from, say, signing off emails with kiss you, miss you, to suggesting the possibility of sex to achieve strategic ends.
I've been working with the wrong women in my life. I've never had that. The women I work with are quite professional.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Wow. No, that's very good. But it definitely happens. Empathy is also the big one. So a good example of this is in the Me Too movement. So this is where the idea of the Me Too movement is this idea that, well, women generally are more empathetic. The flip side of that is to say, okay, so suddenly we need to believe all women. So when women, no matter what their accusation is, we need to believe them. But that's empathy gone haywire, because it's basically saying that there's no space for, women being dishonest, and women are dishonest. Women do lie about things. And now they've been given this golden opportunity where they can basically say whatever they like about men, and there will be serious repercussions. And what I've seen, like some of the research I've done around this, is where there's a psychologist in the States who a lot of the patients that he saw were young men. And this was kind of odd, because it had never happened that he had so many young male patients. And he was interviewed about why that is. Why is he seeing so many young male patients? And his answer was that it's because young males are very scared to get involved with women for fear of being accused of sexually harassing them or sexual misconduct. So instead, they'll watch porn or do whatever they have to do to satisfy themselves, because they can't take the risk of dating a woman because they have no idea what the woman's going to say about them. It could ruin their lives.
To be fair, I think a Pornhub subscription is cheaper than taking a lady out these days. Just with the rand going.
Oh, hell yeah!
As things stand.
No,
so
that's true. Fair enough.
At least they're saving some money.
Also, I mean, I'm sorry. Like with the ladies that are out there now, you know, it is a risk, because if it's reached a point where women aren't even held to a basic legal standard where they have to prove that a man did something to them, then I'm sorry, as a man, I would be very scared to date in this climate, because like there have been so many cases of men being falsely accused. And there was a recent one, is also, or not so recent anymore, but Aziz Ansari, he's a comedian in the States. He's quite left-leaning. But he then went on a date with a woman who wrote an article about it and claimed that he had sexually harassed her. Honestly, if you read that article, he did not sexually harass her. Like, this woman basically just at no point said to him that she didn't like what he was doing, and just left. The power was completely in her hands. She just didn't use it. So he had no idea that she wasn't okay with it. And it's stuff like that where I'm like, okay, I think he's an asshole anyway, but still, like, that's a terrible thing to do to someone, to destroy their career and their reputation, because you had an unsatisfying. But it's really reached the point where it's literally like, these are just bad dates that are now being construed as sexual harassment or sexual misconduct. And this is where I think that, again, this is toxic femininity. This is women using their power to dominate men and to basically say to men, if you put 1 foot out of line, then I have the power to put you in your place. Like, I know that
Sorry, always or in jail, because I want to add to that story. There was also a story in the news of 2 students that had a kerfuffle and a drawl and everything, and the next day also consensual sex, and the next day the lady laid a charge of rape against the guy, and he was just like, "What the fuck?" So this happens more often than one thinks. And it's incredible, because how do you defend yourself in such a situation? Because it's a complete he said, she said. And like you mentioned, if you've got a very left-leaning judge, you're fucked. I'm sorry. Because in their mind, you're already guilty and the facts don't matter. So the problem is these things, while they propagate into society, the Me Too movement as well, when it was at its height, I didn't want to be someone that was like in a court at that time, because the tolerance for it became toxic. You got executed before you were judged. So, but
that's also because they lowered the standard of evidence that you require. That was that Title IX crap that Barack Obama signed off, where you didn't need to have the normal standard of evidence. It was incredibly permissive. And I know it's different in South Africa. I know that it's not that we don't have those permissive systems, but the idea is still that we need to be very conscious of, in our quest for combating femicide and gender-based violence and issues like that. We need to be very conscious of the fact that femininity is equally powerful, and it can also reach a point where it completely distorts what is appropriate and what is proportional to what is happening. And that's what we saw in the States. Like, it was a complete overcorrection. So we went from, women being vulnerable on campuses to women having all the power on campuses and men becoming the victims of women's whims. And that for me is a very important lesson. And yet we don't seem to learn those lessons. We look at the States and we go, yes, no, let's copy that. That seems exactly what we should be doing. It's like, I don't understand. Are you not looking at what's happening and how that society is imploding because of these massive shifts to overcorrect whatever problems they have? And it seems that in South Africa, we're moving in the same direction. So that's a concern. The one thing I wanted to get to is that after this woman wrote this article where she goes into all this toxic femininity about what happens in the workplace, her justification for why it happens is also because of men. Because men have created the hierarchies that have driven women to use whatever power they have to rise up in those hierarchies. So if it wasn't for men creating those hierarchies, women wouldn't be toxic. And that for me is the most ludicrous claim I've ever heard in my life. Men did not invent hierarchies. Hierarchies have existed forever. It is an evolutionary fact. It is built into our biology. And it's not about, I understand the idea that just because it's a function of nature doesn't mean it's something we should, support or encourage or whatever. But at the end of the day, my experience of industry has been that even while people try and combat hierarchies and say, well, no, we need flat structures. We don't want hierarchies at our company. We want a flat structure so that we can create a more dynamic workspace. It's crap, because it doesn't matter what you say. In the end of the day, there will be a hierarchy, even if it's a social hierarchy that's not a formal one that's built into the company. A hierarchy will come into being. So you only so there's this great book. I encourage everyone to read it. If you are in industry, then you really need to read this book. It's called The Management Myth. This book is it's a philosopher who wrote it, and he went into management consulting. And he exposes every management theory that has ever existed for the pile of crap that it is. And the conclusion of the book is to say, hierarchies will always be there. Your only choice is whether you create a good hierarchy or a bad one. So you better start thinking about, even when if you have a flat structure in your company, you have a hierarchy. Even if you don't think you do, you do. And you need to think, is it a toxic hierarchy, or is it one that at least approximates a meritocracy? And that's a reality that most companies don't want to deal with, because they buy into the whole fashion of, oh, let's just create a flat structure and then everything will be great. It really won't. Don't know if you wanted to.
Some people in the comments, as I've seen earlier, me as a toxic male, some have assets and some have flat structures. So, but do you know what? So I've read up on management as well quite a few times on different levels. Depending on what kind of organizational culture you have. A lot of companies have done studies, well, not companies, third-party companies and stuff, have done studies, and actually they come to the conclusion that in most cases, most people don't need managers. They don't need that overhead to start with.
Yes.
Some employees, if you have an output-based system where you get rewarded for your actual output in a business and you get incentivized for your effort, that actually creates kind of a zero accountability. You don't need people to micromanage other people, because people would actually, especially productive, kind of let's call them, what's the word? Ambitious people. Sorry, I don't know why I forgot that word. Ambitious people will actually go and every quarter they get reviewed. And if you did well, why wait a year to promote someone or give them a pay shift? Or why can't we have a sliding scale every month? If you've got systems like that in place, everyone has to pull their weight. The great thing about that is it nabs those people that are there because of nepotism or bad performance, or those toxic people that don't actually bring any value to the table. They just bitch and moan at the water cooler, and they're just being Karens all day. they get wiped out immediately because it's a high competence environment that you're creating.
Yes.
So there
Yeah.
are ways where you can actually hardwire the working place, where you actually measure people purely on productivity, skill, and output, and you
Yes.
eliminate the Karens that are toxic and they're not worth shit to the company. And the problem that I have with the Karens as well, they create a hostile environment for the other employees. It's one sour apple that can bring down a 15 or 20 or bigger businesses, depending on how many people interact with that Karen on a daily basis. And for me, that's never been acceptable. And I've got an exceptional problem with people that make my workplace bad. I'm in my general environment, I don't tolerate drama very well. I'm like, I'll let it skip maybe once, and then I'm actually going to say, hey, listen, I'm not going to scream at you or anything. I know I'm a toxic male. I'll actually be gentle, like inflatables, gentle inflatables pun. Sorry, I had to, and take you one side.
No, I got it. Thanks.
Thank you, Dioné. And take you one side and say, hey, listen, have you had a bad day? What's going on? You seem edgy. What's wrong? So the way I confront stuff usually is not by attacking a person. And the current manager that I have as well is very much like that as well. Like if he sees something is off, he'll ask, he won't attack. And that empathetic approach is very effective, and it disarms you quite quickly, and you feel open to talk to that person. It builds a kind of cadence and trust, which is quite incredible. So yeah, that's my 5 cents on that point. So.
And I agree with that. I mean, I heard Jordan Peterson. I was only recently listening to his conversation with Zizek, which happened in 2019. And in that conversation, he mentions the fact that studies have shown that these days, if you have a hierarchy that's built on power and domination, it won't survive. So we have actually made progress in terms of creating hierarchies that are built more on meritocracy or competence. And I also agree with the idea that we don't need hierarchies that are so complex that you have essentially, like you've been pointing out, a layer of management that's essentially ineffective. I completely agree with the idea.
You can make it redundant.
Yes, you need to create a hierarchy that's effective and efficient, and that's, fulfilling a specific purpose. And I think that that's important. And I think a lot of companies struggle with that as well. They don't want to get rid of certain layers that are not really doing much. And I think, honestly, the most complaints I've ever heard from people have been about their managers. That's literally that first managerial layer that's basically like micromanagers, bosses people around, has no idea what it means to be a manager, because they don't. I also can't really blame them, because I think that we don't really think a lot about what goes into a managerial role and what kinds of people are suited for roles like that. Like you just said, just the basic principle of having an empathetic approach rather than a very bossy approach. Most people, they don't have that. So certain people, their temperament is simply not suited to being a manager. It's just how it is. And then obviously I think there's a training aspect to it, but that's my educational side kicking in, so we won't go too much into that. But my main concern here is that even when we're looking at toxic aspects of femininity, we blame it on men. So it's not the man's fault there's a bloody hierarchy. There's a hierarchy because there's a fucking hierarchy, okay?
Yes.
You don't have that excuse to use your feminine powers in a nefarious way because there happens to be a hierarchy. I think that is all on you. And if women honestly are blaming the hierarchy and patriarchy for that, then that is a serious cop-out. And that for me is part of toxic femininity, is again using your vulnerability and your weakness and blaming someone else for how you behave. It's like, I'm like, honestly, in 2020, you still don't think you have agency? That's astounding to me.
I think for me, the first thing I look for when I meet someone is where's their locus, where's their agency? Is it internal, is it external? And the moment I find like a whiff that they are like, it's the weather's fault, it's the thing's fault, it's capitalism's fault and shit like that, then I immediately know red lights. For me, it's like red flags. It's just like boom, boom, boom. say no more. Like, we're not going to bond. I'm going back home. I'm going to watch some Pornhub or something, you know, I'm copping out. So, because it's such a red light, because people that don't take responsibility or give their agency away, they are the most detrimental people you can have in your life, because they won't ever admit to doing anything wrong. They'll always find something or someone to blame, and whether that's a power structure, a person, an object, or God, or Satan, they will always find a goddamn excuse for their own shortcomings. And I for one have no time for people like that.
But also, how can you trust your heart, your mind, your soul to someone who is not going to take care with it? Because they're always going to say, if they screw up, it's not them, it's something else. I mean, I can't ever trust someone like that, because I'm thinking, but you don't take any responsibility for you, the role that you play in this relationship. It's a two-way street. Thank you, Joe. That's a great comment.
Fuck you, Joe. Welcome here, my friend.
No, that's great, man. I love it. If anyone's wondering, Joe just said, I'm just here for the doctor. That's me, by the way. I'm the
and
doctor.
That's why I told him to get fucked. Thanks. We'll be making this into a podcast episode. And the doctor actually remembered that we should read out the comments when relevant.
Because I'm the doctor. That's because I'm smarter. That's exactly why I'm here, right?
I'm too busy being Yes, I'm too busy being toxic and streaming Pornhub on my other screen. So sorry. Yeah, I've got memory problems and ADD, you know.
I know. All boys are like that. And so I'd like to actually just take this to a whole nother dimension. It's quite a shift. But I was watching an episode of Dave Rubin interviewing Eckhart Tolle. And he, at the end of the interview, so if you're interested in the interview, go to the end if you want to hear this bit that I'm going to talk about. But he talks about the yin and the yang. And he talks about the balance between the two. And the yang is the masculine principle, and the yin is the feminine principle.
Yes. Oh, God, we've lost the doctor, it seems. Hopefully she'll be back in a second. Perfect, still there. If I have to say, Doctor, we lost you at the yin, and you just had an incredible still. You kind of looked like this.
Oh, okay.
Welcome back, Doctor.
Sorry.
You were saying.
So we've got the yang, which is the masculine principle. The yin is the feminine principle. And throughout history, we've seen how countries have become possessed by one principle or the other. So if we're looking at the 20th century, we can see how dictatorships took hold, and that's becoming possessed by the yang principle. And Tolle even speaks about how more recently, the North America and Europe has become gripped by the yin principle, the feminine principle. So they've become so empathetic and so compassionate that they have now essentially become, in the same way that the yang principle can become unbalanced and distorted, they have now become unbalanced and distorted, where instead, so he says that empathy has now turned to political correctness. So instead of a balanced kind of empathy, where it was important in the 60s to acknowledge marginalized communities and acknowledge the suffering of different kinds of identities, that has now taken hold and taken grip of that country to such an extent that we now have an overcorrection where it has manifested as political correctness. And he talks about how in Germany, for example, Germany has become the most compassionate country in Europe. What that has manifested as is this principle of open borders. So instead of having closed borders, or as it was in Nazi Germany, expanding your borders and then closing them. So the masculine principle, which is this principle, if people can see, is now turned to the feminine principle, which is this, which is let's open our borders and because we are so compassionate, and this is the Syrian refugee crisis, let's let everyone into our country. And we all know what the consequences of that are. So, and what he says there is that what we need is not masculinity or femininity. What we always lack is wisdom. And I think this is the lesson that I want to leave us with, is that when we talk about masculinity, it's not about whether you are stoic or aggressive or any of those things. It's about, are you exercising that at the right time, in the right place, to the proportional degree? So my area of specialization is ancient philosophy. And the Aristotelian principle is nothing in excess. Morality lies where you don't have excess. And so when it comes to masculinity or femininity, as long as you exercise whatever your masculine or feminine qualities are, if you exercise them to the right degree at the right time, it is virtuous. But that's the thing we lack. We do not have virtue. We do not have that wisdom that comes with, and he equates wisdom with awareness. And I think that is correct. It's awareness of the situation. It's awareness of what is required in that situation and the extent to which it's required.
Is it also a lot of self-awareness, Doctor?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Self-awareness, because you have to be aware of your own tendencies, your own securities, your own triggers. And so I think that in a lot of ways, which is a big part of what Eckhart Tolle talks about, is that we are not aware. In most respects, we are not aware of all those things. And that's a personal responsibility. That's not society's responsibility. Again, you can't outsource that to society and say, it's society's responsibility that I become self-aware. That is on you. And that is the only way you will learn when you need to exercise which quality. So I am happy to admit that I am a combination of masculine and feminine qualities. I lean more towards masculine qualities. And that's why I've had to learn to be less confrontational. When I say that, what I mean is I need to learn when confrontation is required and when it's going to make the situation worse.
Yes.
And women need to learn the exact same thing. So if you have distinctively feminine traits, you need to learn when to exercise them. And you need to stop blaming other people. So stop blaming the hierarchy. Stop blaming, men and women. And it is up to you whether you become a wise human being. And what Eckhart Tolle says, because is in that sense, when we all think that the feminist issue is specific to our concerns and our agendas and whatever, it's not. It can manifest itself at the level of a country. A country can become gripped by this principle. And the only control you have over that is to look inwards and say, what am I doing that I can learn from and I can control to improve the situation?
Yeah. I just want to say Joe's being a toxic male and he just said you're looking good tonight. How dare he, hey?
That's just disgusting. I mean, I don't ever want to hear that I'm looking good. Like, I mean, seriously.
Joe Media, you're a misogynistic pig. You know that.
I mean, women never want to hear that they are attractive.
Yes.
I mean, when was the last time that you heard a woman just say, it would be nice if guys just found me attractive? I mean, that's unheard of.
Never. Doctor, I just want to take 2 steps back about Germany. Interesting thing, on my previous episode, Getting Out of Your Own Way, we actually had a discussion about that, where we mentioned that in war times, men fight, men get home after the battles, after the war. They're psychologically fucked. So some of them grab the bottle, some of them become very quiet and distant, and and sometimes they become, maybe violent towards the children or the wife or both, unfortunately. then what happens is that child grows up and they say, I'll never be like my father. Now,
Yes.
there's where the overcorrection comes in. And then they say, I'll never do anything that my father did. And then they raise their children in a snowflakey manner where they coddle them to death. And when you coddle children too much, they don't build resilience. Like we mentioned earlier, the opposite of resilience is fragility. And when you're fragile, everything is an existential threat and you get triggered and everything is unjust. That's why I'm pushing for the notion, if people build resilience in their lives, psychologically, like you mentioned, that self-awareness, that's part of it. Being stoic is part of it. Reacting proportionately to the threat or the event, very important. That takes a ton of self-control. I mean, I've gotten emails and I have started typing the rant. I know I won't send it, but I need to let it out because I need to vent. So I'm typing this email and I'm just like swearing and then I stop and then I've done it and I cool down and then I type what I actually need to diplomatically type. But more than once I found myself going into this fat rant, which is good for you, man. You really vent well, or you just get onto a phone with a buddy and say, you would not believe what this, get it out, machine gun, and then you feel much better and then you're able to get back to it. So having coping mechanisms, whether it's you writing that fake email that you will never send out, and please don't put the person in that thing if you put ongeluk druk send, you're going to get fired. That's a very bad idea. But do have coping mechanisms. Joe, can you send, sorry, I just want to mention something, Joe. WhatsApp, or anyone WhatsApp me that link. I can post it. Hopefully it will work, about Joe's show tonight. So I need to get some mods on. I just need to see how. Sorry, I'm still a bloody noob. Yeah, and with regards with Europe, it's a strange thing because what happens is now people are moving in with a complete different set of values than the Europeans. And the Middle East, like even the Middle Eastern ones are the most fascinating. They get to Europe and they shout at women for wearing blouses and stuff and showing some titties and stuff like that. And they're like, no, you're in our country now. And then they make the women feel awkward. They want to bring Sharia law, which is basically Old Testament law, to the modern world in their area where they stay, and they want to enforce it and get violent with women and the people that don't conform to their norms, but they're the fucking refugees. They're the guests, but they act like that. So again, look, I mean, it's a complete disaster.
Eckhart Tolle talks about guilt and how guilt manifests, and I think that in Germany, it's a big part of it. So their guilt over the Second World War. I know that because I have a friend who's German, and she lives in Germany now. And she told me that in Germany, it's considered improper to be nationalistic in any way. So even like raising the German flag at a sports event is considered improper. So they're still in the grip of guilt that they feel from their past. And I think that's also part of what has motivated what we're seeing now. And this is the part, again, about self-awareness, is you need to be aware of what's motivating you to be sure that you make wise decisions. And Eckhart Tolle's position, as I understand it, is that by being in the grip of a feminine principle, they're once again negating or neglecting wisdom, because they're all they're seeing is the correction to what has come before.
Bye, Joe. Yeah.
So anyway, so that's really what I want to leave the audience with, is that we need to acknowledge women's power. We need to not be naive and think that an overcorrection towards feminism or the feminine principle is going to fix what we see as wrong in society, because what we haven't yet cultivated is wisdom. And I think that, as Jordan Peterson constantly points out, wisdom starts from you, the individual. So stop trying to change society before you've actually oriented yourself towards wisdom, towards a proper way of being in the world that's productive, constructive and helpful. And I think that we are so obsessed with trying to push our energies outwards towards society and say, society is the problem, that's the problem, that's the problem, that we don't acknowledge the power of our own agency and the responsibility that comes with it. And that's the big thing for me. Your agency comes with a responsibility because you have a lot of power to influence things around you. And women equally have that. So in my opinion, you need to stop looking outwards and think about how can you make yourself better so that it ripples out into the world.
Yeah, I'll add to that what you said. Make your own bed, and before you want to go out and change the world, do it in a disciplined manner every morning. Have a clean house. Fix the shit in your life first before you go out and preach to people how they should live their lives and conduct themselves. And by fixing yourself and pushing yourself and challenging yourself, do a martial art. Do something new every week, every weekend, every second week. Get into something that you have to constantly improve in. Martial arts is a great example, or a difficult sport, or any sport, as a matter of fact. Then once you do that, and once you succeed in one thing, it becomes a knock-on effect, and you kind of excel in many other ways, and it really helps you to become better and more self-sufficient, and you just become a force of nature, and you won't be a loser. I feel like you could just see these Antifa types, you know, they are these absolute fucking beta males. They look like they've been living on in their mother's basements for 30 plus years. They're pale, they're malnourished, they've got clicks, dry, damaged hair, and they need a lot of Tresemme to repair it. And they just, fuck man, they just don't look like us. So, but they're out fighting for social justice, but they look like shit. They haven't gotten a good life. They're on the lowest sphere of society. And no wonder they want free shit, because when it comes to meritocracy, you know, they didn't do their due. They didn't work hard for anything in their lives. That's why everything should be free. And that's why it's toxic. And sorry, I went away from the...
I'll tell you, it's such a funny story. So when I was in Canada doing my doctorate, Jordan Peterson was at our university giving a talk. And in one talk, he had said something like, he had said that, look, if you want to combat these activists, all you need to do is make sure that your talk is early enough, because they're really lazy, so they're not going to get up early. So he scheduled his talk for 9 a.m. And when we got there, literally just the week before, when he'd had a talk at McMaster, which is a university near where I was, which is University of Western Ontario, he'd had a full-blown protest, and it was the whole talk was shut down and all of this. So I thought that was because it was going to happen to our talk. But then we got there at 9 o'clock and there was no one, because those motherfuckers were sleeping. They were like, this is way too early for us to get up.
They were still sniffing farts in their parents' basement.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, you know, I think everyone has their dreams and aspirations, and how I see it, and I'll close on this, and then Dioné, if you want to add to your own, sorry. For me, I'm in this journey to build resilience, and it starts on the inside. You have to really get out of your own way first, know what your triggers are, know what your weaknesses are. This week I've got a little project. I'm actually timing myself on everything that I spend time on, and I'll have an episode on that where I actually break it down. Like, it's anything from bathroom breaks to studying to cleaning my kitchen. So there's lots of creative sections that I actually see, what the fuck am I doing with my life? And it falls down to me being accountable to myself. Am I spending? I want to see the numbers in a week, because if I've got a week's worth of data, I can make that into a month, and I can see, okay, cool. This is how much time I'm spending out with my buddies drinking. This is how much I study. This is how much I'm very productive at work. This is how much I'm on Twitter Hub or Germ Hub. Hopefully Germ's new channel that he will be creating, or a platform, because he's being kicked off of everyone in the known universe. And that's my way to be accountable. And I've also been on that Get Out of Your Own Way episode we had. I was hungover on that episode, and I'm calling myself out on my own bullshit because that's what I'm about. So now I decided, fuck it, for a month I'm not drinking, and I might extend that. So I'm looking at ways to improve myself, because if I feel like shit, I'm not giving my best to my audience and to myself, and I can't let that happen. And I've got so many things in the pipeline that I have to get done. I can't afford to be fucking man down for a day or feel like shit for a day. Instead of white noise, I'll be white zombie. And I don't think anyone wants that at this stage of the fight. So yeah, that's me closing off. Dioné?
So look, the main message again is that I think women need to cut the bullshit, acknowledge their power, and with that, whether you want to recognize your agency or not, you have it. You know you do. You need to accept the responsibility that comes with that, which is essentially what we're talking about, is how to take responsibility for your own life. And before you go out trying to change hierarchies or trying to change men and dictating to them how they need to be in the world, figure out what you need to do to be a productive individual and to not be another toxic human being in a workplace, which, like we've said, like it can literally contaminate an entire workplace because you've decided that you're going to use your power in nefarious ways. So for me, that's a really big one in terms of activism. Start with yourself before you do anything else. And I think that very few of us have that self-awareness to even start that project, like you're saying, of bettering ourselves. And I think that that's enormously important, but also very powerful. And also, I'll tell a joke because I was told that I should tell this joke. So in Friends, Phoebe, the hippie, says at one point, "We can vote, we can drive. What more do these broads want?" I'll leave you with that.
Dioné, thank you so much. Audience, thank you for watching. My next episode with Ivo Factor will be released tomorrow. Yeah. So luckily I've edited it. I've been productive. So I'll just put the music in and do the final touches. And yeah, it will be out tomorrow. Dioné, thank you so much for your wisdom. Because you're in the philosophical field, I'll probably lean on you again for some wisdom, especially when it comes to being stoic and building mental fortitude, resilience. We can definitely talk toughening up. And yeah, when I'm in Joburg, I'll definitely come visit. And when you're up in the East Coast, come visit me as well. Have a few beers and hang out like real men.
Yes, I'd enjoy that. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Doctor. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one. Cheers.